What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the fact that I've been on YouTube for 10 years, technically tomorrow on Halloween, but it has been an entire decade since I started this channel, and while most people probably wouldn't know that, given that I've really only gotten sizable, I guess you could say, over the past couple of years, because for a long time, 6 years in fact, this was an unpaid hobby, which has slowly kind of morphed into my full-time gig. And I thought it might be fun to, just kind of take a minute and talk a little bit about that. With that in mind, there's not going to be like a ton of structure to this video, mostly just kind of rambling into a microphone on this one. And while none of my videos are really scripted, I do usually make bullet points for them to keep my thoughts organized. Whereas here, I'm just not going to be doing that. So just kind of jumping into it here, with 10 years on YouTube, this year, 2025, has actually been the largest year for me, which I suppose isn't too surprising when you think about it, so I post videos basically every day. And most of the content I put out is stuff that you could consider mostly evergreen, like a lot of the reviews and things stay relevant over time, meaning that, of course, people stay watching them, especially when like relevant stuff comes up. My Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 review obviously got a ton of views just before the release of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, that kind of thing. My story videos for Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, my new player's guide for them even got hundreds of thousands of views right around the time Baldur's Gate 3 was blowing up. And because of just trends like that and the amount of videos I've put out, it all sort of snowballs and cascades into more and more viewership. And so far, that's kind of how this year's been going. So despite the fact that most of the really big stuff happened in the early months, in terms of just like raw views, biggest year for the channel thus far. To put that into a little bit of an easier perspective for people, I average at this point about 100,000 views a day, kind of regardless of what I put out. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less. And I tell you all that because it is a very far cry from my first videos getting like 100 views and me being incredibly stoked about it. Some of my early reviews that started doing really well during COVID, like Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, or my very first one, Greedfall, are by today's standards of pretty terrible quality. In terms of like actual sound, things like that. The content stays pretty relevant, but they'd probably be a bit easier to listen to if I did them today, which is a big part of it. And it's hard to, I think, capture all of the different little ways you can grow over 10 years, while at the same time acknowledging that things are also growing and changing around you all at the same time, meaning that the landscape for both literally YouTube, but also just the video game industry at large is wildly different than when I started this. Which is kind of strange because while my approach to like making videos and how to convey information has changed, the core philosophy hasn't really once I kind of figured out what I wanted to do with game reviews, which was, of course, give people as much information as I can about a game and, let them decide for themselves, of course, whether or not that was worth their time in addition to my own opinions. That has worked out very well thus far, and I would like to obviously continue to do it. This has been the best job I have ever had, and it is not even close. And getting, honestly, to just provide some value to people has been a great time for me, in addition to chasing my own dreams. But a good chunk of what I want to talk about here really is just how kind of important video games have always been to me. Which might get a little personal, I guess, at the very least for one part, I suppose, but to sort of put into perspective how long I had wanted to do this, video games pretty much from the time I encountered them and some of my earliest memories have always been just the thing that I did. And it's really interesting looking back because if you've heard me talk about some of this stuff before, you know that I did not grow up especially well. We were very poor. I was homeless from 15 to 17. And many of the memories that I tie to video games are also tied, looking back, with some pretty awful stuff. Some of which I'll tell you about, some of which will probably be my own private business forever. Like, for instance, when I was very young, probably around like 5 or 6, I remember that I would get left home alone a lot because they knew that I would just sit in my room and play Mario and not answer the door or attempt to really talk to anyone. When I was 12 years old, I remember playing a lot of games and telling everybody about how I wanted to start like a business where I could like make guides and stuff and hang posters and help people get through video games. And, obviously nobody really took it that seriously when I was 12 and talking about it, but ironically, that did kind of become my job. And it can become kind of difficult, I think, to separate stuff like that or all of the hundreds of hours I played Oblivion on a little laptop in an abandoned house when I was 15 that for some reason just never had the power turned off. But how much of that passion is the reason I'm here today, I guess, is what I'm saying, because about 6 years into an unpaid hobby, I think it's safe to imagine that I'd pretty well given up on this ever being like a full-time thing. It was just something I did to pass the time, give me a sort of creative outlet, and then, somewhat ironically, during COVID, when things weren't exactly going well for everyone, that gave me a boost in viewership that I was able to latch onto, in addition to Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous coming out, letting me sort of capitalize on a niche, sort of flung me into the YouTube algorithm, and the rest is history. And I have this just immense passion for video games and what they mean to me. However, hearing everything I just went over, I don't think it's difficult to imagine that my relationship with video games has at times been a little complicated. I have absolutely used them at various points in my life to escape reality as a bit of a crutch, a coping mechanism even. And as a result, it took me a while to sort of decouple some emotional attachment that I had to the medium. These days, I don't get like super wrapped up in like my whole personality being about video games. Nothing in my life fails to get done as a result of playing them. Nor do I come unglued every time a video game isn't what I wanted it to be. You suffer enough disappointments, you start to just sort of accept what they are and what they aren't. Especially when you've reviewed hundreds and played, well over 1,000, I'd have to imagine. Though to be fair, it's not like I have an exact count there. But kind of long story short here, from some of my earliest memories even, video games have always been the thing I wanted to do and be involved in, and basically every day I get to live that dream. And I think it was a mix of just an immense amount of effort, combined with certainly some luck, that has allowed me to do that, and I just wanted to share, as always, that I am incredibly grateful for the opportunity. The stars have aligned, and I've been running away with it ever since. I have very much so been trying to make hay while the sun is shining, because I know full well eventually that will likely change, and I want to be able to look back and say that I made the absolute most of this. Which is why I work so hard to make videos every single day, or get these reviews done and out there, and play all these games, that kind of thing. Especially since, as many of the people who have watched me for a long time are well aware, I had a sales job before this. That job was draining, honestly, but it's important in the sense that it taught me a lot about how to deal with people, how to run a business, and a lot of other important things that go on behind the scenes of running a YouTube channel. Stuff you probably wouldn't think about that, you do have to deal with. Bookkeeping, some legal paperwork, paying your taxes via royalties that come in from the ads, and a fair few other things. So even the stuff in my life that wasn't centered around video games has ironically kind of informed what I do now, which has always just kind of been funny to me because for a job that I didn't really enjoy, it really did teach me a lot of important stuff that led directly into this. But one of the main things I actually want to talk about in this video, though, is that realistically, I would not be able to do this without a fair amount of support, mostly from people that you all have never heard of or will ever meet, meaning, of course, my family. I've talked a little bit about this here and there, but just to set off with this point, which is going to be important here in a moment, I was adopted as a teenager at 17 by a family that I had stayed with previously. When I talk about my parents, they are who I am referring to generally. They took me in at 17 after learning about the fact that I had been homeless. They stepped in, helped me get everything sorted out with school, so I graduated on time with my full diploma. And they have always been incredibly supportive with everything I wanted to do, this channel included. And back when I made the extremely, at the time, very scary decision to do this full-time, I had several long conversations with my mom about it after YouTube had started to outpay my regular job at the time. And the gist of it was probably what you would expect, that, as long as the numbers make sense, I believe in you. Which probably isn't a huge surprise, as this is the same woman that, I say forced, but that's probably a little dramatic, made sure that I walked across the stage for my high school graduation, which is not something I initially wanted to do, but my mom told me that she wasn't going to let me rob myself of that moment. And looking back, she was obviously very correct. So while it's obviously not really the focus of the channel much, a huge reason I'm able to get to do all of this stuff is, again, from the support of a family you guys will probably never meet in any capacity, really. But it still imparted on me how important it is to support your kids and their dreams. And some of what I try to do with this channel realistically is just show my son, hopefully, that, you can do more than you think. As long as you approach things with the appropriate rationale and the appropriate expectations, dreams are not as out of reach as you might imagine. And knowing full well that it's very likely my son is going to watch some of these videos in the future, I always try to keep that in mind. But, ultimately, why am I telling you all of this? Well, because I think it's a bit of important background about something else I would like to share with this video, and that is kind of a weird one, to be honest with you. I debated whether or not I wanted to talk about this at all because it actually happened about 6 weeks ago. So my biological mother passed away very recently, 6 weeks ago. And that event, combined with just being very busy generally with all these reviews and everything I've been doing on top of this 10-year YouTube anniversary, obviously has me contemplating life a little bit, and it was a very weird situation, as you can imagine. As you already know, I'm adopted, so that's a little strange in and of itself, but then I had not spoken to my biological mother in about 15 years at that point, because while people know that I was homeless, what I never really explained to anyone, outside of very general terms, was the why. And the short answer is, my biological mother abandoned me. So we bounced around a lot, were very poor, the power got shut off, so I went to go sleep at a friend's house for a couple of days while that got sorted out. And I found out not long after that she had just left, the whole state. And so I found myself alone at 15, not really knowing what to do, obviously. I was terrified of the concept of foster care. I've never heard a good thing about it, to be honest. And so I did what any 15-year-old would do, which is I started forging my mother's signature on school documents so I could keep doing things like getting free lunch. Couch surfed at a lot of friends' houses. I found an abandoned house that, as mentioned earlier, still had the power on, and I would crash there a lot. A school friend of mine had a laptop that they weren't using anymore because they had gotten a new one for Christmas, so they gave me their old one. And I used to play video games on that. Single player obviously didn't always have a Wi-Fi, but that and kind of going to school was kind of just how I lived for a couple of years until eventually people started asking questions. And I was eventually able to get in contact with people I had lived with previously because of all the bouncing around, which is my adopted family. And as mentioned, they got everything sorted out, got me on my feet, made sure I graduated high school, which ironically, while I was homeless, my grades were much better than they were previously because I was in one place and I wasn't bouncing around so much. So I went from C's and D's because of all the moving to A's and B's, where I was just able to actually focus on school despite being homeless. Because it was very obvious to me, even at that age, my only way out of this was to try to graduate and do something in terms of a job. And weird stories like that are basically kind of the hallmark of much of my first 18 years of life. So it was a lot of me leaning on video games for support as a friend in a weird way. And yet, that stuff really just kind of pales in comparison to the support and love that I have received from my family. And to this day, again, their support and their help with a lot of different little things in day to day are really what allow me to focus so much of my effort on this. And to sort of at least start moving to wrap this up, my life has and will probably always continue to be weirdly intertwined with the medium of video games. They are incredibly important to me, and while I don't know if I'll be running this YouTube channel forever, I do know that I'll be playing video games forever. And I hope I get to continue sharing that with everyone and talking about these things and why they're important to me. And while I have certainly decoupled some of my, at one point, pretty unhealthy attachment to them from myself, which has kind of just let me enjoy them more, honestly, as I don't really have all these attachments and expectations and just stuff tied up in, whether or not it's fun or good or bad or whatever. I either enjoy it for what it is or I don't, and then I move on. And so, in spite of 10 years on YouTube, God, who knows how many reviews, 300-ish, all the nonstop chatter about video games, and yet I still find myself probably incapable of finding the words of expressing just what they mean to me, what they've been across the decades of my life thus far. But I do know one thing for sure. It's been an incredible 10 years on this platform. I hope I get to spend another 10 or so on it. Obviously, I have no idea what that looks like. I have some plans for the future I'm not really ready to talk about, or, how I expect things will probably go, things like that. But in some form or another, I think I will probably always continue to be here putting out reviews, talking about video games in one form or another. And it is not lost on me just how rare the opportunity to do that is, which is a big part of why I can't seem to stop just, continuing to do this and putting out videos. So ultimately, I love what I do. I hope I get to do it for that much longer. I'm incredibly grateful to the people watching who allow me to get to live my dream here, because honestly, I'm well beyond that. This entire experience, this YouTube channel, all these games has went well beyond my wildest dreams. And that is precisely the reason why I keep giving this everything I've got. Hopefully you've enjoyed the channel. Hopefully you continue to enjoy it. But really, just thank you for being here. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.